After returning from Yulong Snow Mountain, I answered the 39th call from Frank. "Tammy, the location shows you're not at home. Where have you run off to?" His blunt questioning came at me. I didn't respond and calmly walked out of the airport. When Frank came to pick me up, he went straight past my suitcase, his expression cold with a hint of mockery. "I thought you were going to run away like others, but here you are, back again after just a few days, looking all disheveled." "The wedding is in a few days. I've been busy lately, so I don't have time to keep an eye on you. Just stay put and don't run around." As he spoke, he skillfully pulled out a cigarette and lit it in the car. I couldn't help but frown and turn to open the car window. The cold wind rushed in, and I took a deep breath, calmly saying, "Let's go to the wedding design company." Counting the days, the wedding invitations should be ready. Frank scoffed, pressing the gas pedal as he drove to the wedding design company. He refused to go inside, leaning against the door while smoking, occasionally scrolling through his phone and revealing a knowing smile. The shop assistant took out the wedding invitations. "Miss Tammy, your wedding invitations are ready." Frank turned his head to take a look, his gaze landing on the bright red invitation. "So tacky. You just like this bright red, there's no creativity at all." I didn't refute, I just quietly counted the invitations and took out my phone to scan the code for payment. Just as I was about to speak, Frank's phone rang. Without hesitation, Frank answered, and a delicate voice came through, overly affected. "I'm going for a checkup alone again. How pitiful. I wonder if my childhood companion has time to keep me company." Frank hung up the phone, pulled out the car keys from his pocket, and left me with a cold remark. "You can manage here alone. I have something to take care of and will leave first." He didn't even ask, he just informed me. He was certain I would comply or accept. Without looking back, he drove away. I looked up at the clerk and said, "I've already paid for these invitations, you can just throw them away. Let's cancel all the other arrangements as well, no need to continue with the design." The clerk was taken aback and seemed a bit troubled, "But miss, we've already designed half of it. If you cancel, the deposit can't be refunded. No need for a refund." After leaving the store, I suddenly remembered that I should also cancel the wedding dress. After canceling everything, I went into a ramen shop, ordered a bowl of my favorite noodles, and started editing Facebook. I had captured many beautiful scenes at Yulong Snow Mountain these days, all worth commemorating on Facebook. Forming a magic square, I added 2 words, "as wished." Many people came to like it, including my childhood playmate Heather. Soon, a Facebook notification from her popped up. The picture was of Frank's focused profile. The caption read, "As promised, a lifetime companion. Thank you, my childhood playmate, for accompanying me to the checkup again." A group of people below commented 999. I casually liked it and put down my phone, focusing on my noodles. A few minutes later, an abrupt phone ring sounded. It was Frank calling. I casually rejected the call, but the other side was particularly persistent and called again, so I had no choice but to answer. "Tammy, did you go to Yulong Snow Mountain by yourself?" Frank's voice was low, still carrying a hint of anger. "Did we not agree that I would accompany you after we got married? How can you, a girl, go so far away? Aren't you worried about the dangers?" The voice on the other end was noisy, with the occasional sound of a nurse calling out patients' names. "Frank must be in the hospital." I replied, "There's no danger, I just went because I wanted to." Hearing his self-righteous concern now only leaves me feeling indifferent. After 8 years of dating, I have asked to go to Yulong Snow Mountain every year. It was my mother's dying wish. But each time, Frank would refuse with various excuses. "Cece, I've been too busy lately, let's go after I'm done." "I have something going on at home, let's go next year." "I don't have time." So by last year, when I brought it up, he didn't even need to find excuses anymore, he could directly refuse with undisguised annoyance. And I was already tired of this endless waiting. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up. Without waiting for Frank to respond, I decisively pressed the red hang-up button, feeling a sense of relief. When I returned home in the evening, I was engrossed in my laptop in the study. Frank suddenly threw a piece of clothing at my face. "Tammy, can you please organize your things? Your worn clothes are scattered everywhere." The icy decoration was sharp enough to cut my face, oozing a fine, dense pain. I picked it up from under the sofa. "Organize your own things, and don't let it happen again." Looking down at the sexy, revealing low-cut nightgown, I coldly replied, "It's not mine." Frank's expression changed slightly, suddenly realizing something, and his demeanor became a bit flustered. He helped pick it up from the ground and hid it behind his back. "It might be something Heather accidentally left behind when she stayed over last time. I'll return it to her another day." I didn't say anything and continued to focus on my laptop. But Frank looked guilty, pulling out an expired Band-Aid from the medicine box. He carefully sat down next to me. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have treated you that way earlier. I didn't see that there was something so sharp on top." The smell from the Band-Aid made me feel nauseous. I turned away, saying, "It's nothing." Then I hugged my laptop and went back to my room. Frank stood there in a daze, staring at my departing figure. He was lost in thought for a long time. "Tammy, why haven't you checked on me these days? And I feel like something's different about you, as if you're always avoiding me." Frank walked in, still surrounded by the steam from his recent shower. He raised his hand to wipe the water droplets from his hair with a towel, seemingly unintentionally expressing his dissatisfaction to me. My hands froze in motion. Suddenly, I remembered the past. During our 8 years of dating, we would chat almost every day. Even when we were busy and had no time, we never lost contact. I think he was a part of my daily life. Frank, however, was particularly resistant, saying that I was checking up on him. Now, when I open our chat window, the last conversation was half a month ago. Clearly, the current relaxation and distance are what Frank wants, yet he has objections. I smiled and said, "You're overthinking it. I've been a bit busy lately and can't keep bothering you. Get to bed early." After saying that, I closed my notebook, picked up my pillow, and walked towards the study. Although we've been together for 8 years, we separated 6 months ago. I don't like the smell of smoke. Frank quit smoking for me for 3 years, but as soon as Heather returned, all that effort went to waste. Heather is his childhood companion who grew up with him, and she is also the unforgettable white moonlight in his heart. They openly slept in the same bed, saying they had been doing this since they were little. When I was sick with a fever and needed him the most, a single phone call from Heather could summon Frank away. At first, I felt jealous and resentful. I hated myself for having a boyfriend with such a childhood companion. But now, my heart is calm and untroubled. Even if the child in Heather's belly is his, I no longer care. After all, I have already decided to leave. Watching my determined figure leave, Frank suddenly panicked. "Tammy," he called out to stop me. "I rinsed my mouth tonight and washed away the smell of smoke. Can we sleep together?" Seeing me unmoved, Frank got up and hugged me from behind. "Cece, we're getting married in half a month anyway. Haven't you always wanted a home?" "Home?" My eyes turned slightly red. "Yes, I have wanted a home for these 8 years. Because my mother passed away early, I lack a sense of security and belonging, and I desperately want to build a small family of my own with Frank." But later I realized that Frank's life was destined to be chaotic. I can never sever ties with Heather. If my life is destined to be spent this way, then I would rather not have this home. I sniffed and pushed Frank's hand away. "We'll talk about it later." Then I walked out of the room and closed the door. I submitted the resignation letter I had written overnight first thing in the morning, and my boss called me into his office for a talk. He has taken good care of me over the years, guiding me step by step to promotions. Upon learning that I was leaving, he seemed a bit puzzled. "Tammy, is something wrong? Why do you have to resign?" I smiled and said, "I want to change to a different city to live." My boss understood and didn't ask further, quickly approving my resignation. A colleague who has a good relationship with me was reluctant to see me go and wanted to treat me to dinner after work. As we walked to the bottom of the building, it was damp, and I didn't know when it had started to rain. While waiting for the bus with my colleague, someone suddenly called out to me from behind. "Tammy!" A black Audi stopped not far away. Frank slowly rolled down the car window, his gaze falling on my wet hair, and frowned. "Get in, I'm here to pick you up." I didn't move, and soon a playful laugh came from the passenger side. "Tammy, I told you that Frank really loves you, right? He comes to pick you up even on rainy days. I'm so envious." Heather explained with a smile, noticing my expressionless gaze at her. "Oh, I didn't bring an umbrella today, and Frank just happened to give me a ride." "You don't mind, do you?" I chuckled lightly. "I don't mind." I also had no intention of getting in the car. Frank waited for a while, growing impatient. Just as he was about to speak, my colleague's taxi arrived. My colleague and I got into the car one after the other, and as I closed the door, Frank's urgent voice came through. "Tammy, I came specifically to pick you up." "Where are you going?" I replied him. "I have some things to take care of, and my colleague is going the same way, so I'm not going back for now." I then closed the car window, driving out of his sight. While eating hot pot with my colleagues, Frank called me multiple times, becoming quite a nuisance. I chose to silence my phone, flipped it over, and continued to joke with my colleagues. After the gathering, my colleague's husband came to pick her up. "Cece, how about I have my husband take you home?" I shook my head and smiled. "No need, you guys go ahead." I sat in the hot pot restaurant, continuing to eat the bubbling, spicy hot pot. When Frank came in, he was completely drenched. There was no follower behind him, and he looked lonely and disheveled. As soon as he walked in, his gaze fell on the spicy hot pot, and he frowned. "Tammy, aren't you not supposed to eat spicy food? Eat less, or you'll get a heat rash again." I didn't stop moving, shoveling a full chopstick of spicy tripe into my mouth, so spicy that tears were about to burst out. But I smiled. After 8 years of dating, he still doesn't know that my favorite food is spicy. Because whenever Frank eats something spicy, he gets sores on his lips. I almost gave up spicy hot pot just to make him feel better. I can only satisfy my craving for spicy food when I go out alone or have dinner with colleagues. And by the way, it's Heather who gets fiery from eating spicy food. After finishing the hot pot, Frank insisted on driving me home. The atmosphere in the car was heavy, and Frank seemed to be sulking, while I had already lost the energy to comfort him. I put on my Bluetooth headphones and continued listening to my podcast. I don't know how long it had been when Frank suddenly spoke up. "Cece, I've been neglecting you these past few days because Heather just got pregnant, and her boyfriend is abroad, not taking care of anything. We grew up together, our bond is deeper than others, she is like a sister to me, and I always can't help but care a little more about her." When Frank said this, his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. It was clear he was a bit nervous, especially when mentioning Heather. I remember 2 months ago, Frank's rarely used phone memo, which was filled with a list for preparing for pregnancy. It had 2 columns, one for the pregnant woman and one for the baby. I still recall when we talked about future marriage and childbearing plans, and when it came to having a child, Frank looked impatient. "I don't have time to raise a child, there's no plan for pregnancy in the next 5 years. But once it was about Heather, all his bottom lines could be shaken. The podcast just moved on to the next segment, and I casually switched it, nodding. After all, we were childhood playmates, so it's only right to care a bit more. Frank was taken aback, turning to look at me in disbelief. You really don't mind?" Every time Heather was brought up, we would argue endlessly, leaving each time in discord. But now I am indifferent, and Frank seems to be the one who is not used to it. I couldn't help but laugh. What's there to mind about? After all, I have already quit my job, and tomorrow I will sell the small house under my name, allowing me to completely leave the city. Everything here has nothing to do with me. Frank is no longer important. After returning home, Frank handed me a beautifully wrapped gift box. "Cece, I've neglected you these past few days. Once I'm done with this busy period, I'll spend some quality time with you." In half a month, it will be our wedding. Have you thought about where you want to go for our honeymoon? Seeing that I didn't respond, Frank took the initiative to open the gift box. Inside was an old-fashioned gold necklace. On the way here, I accidentally scrolled through Heather's Facebook. Stupid childhood playmate, even though it's a gold necklace, it's so tacky that I wouldn't wear it even if you threw it at me. But it's okay, my childhood playmate quickly bought me another one that I liked to make up for it. That necklace, which was so despised, is the one that Frank is holding. I didn't respond, picked up a bath towel, and walked towards the bathroom. I was too tired today, I'll talk about it another day. I lingered in the bathroom for an hour and a half, applied a face mask, and after finishing my skincare, I came out. Frank was still awake, sitting in the lounge chair on the balcony, smoking. His gaze was distant as he looked out at the twinkling lights, probably missing Heather, who was not by his side. I ignored him and tossed aside the face mask, going back to sleep. In my dreams, I was vaguely aware of someone sitting by my bed, softly calling my name, and wanting to kiss me. As soon as I caught a whiff of smoke, I frowned, pushed the person away in annoyance, and turned over to continue sleeping. When I woke up the next day, Frank had already gone to the office. After having breakfast, I scheduled an appointment with the real estate agent at the second-hand housing transaction center, preparing to sell the house. The house we lived in was bought with my 5 years of savings, paid in full, and it was meant to be my premarital asset. At that time, Frank was broke and couldn't even pay the rent. Later, he directly moved in with me. Over the years, his company has been doing better and better, and he never suggested moving out. When I asked him, he just smiled and said, "We've built feelings here, Cece. How about we get married here in the future?" I thought his money was for other uses in running the company. Until I found out that after Heather returned to her country and had nowhere to stay, Frank waved his hand and directly helped her buy a villa by the sea. The price was more than 10 times that of this apartment. Since I was leaving, the house that belonged to me should also be sold. The location of the house was good, and soon there were interested buyers contacting me. That evening, I prepared a feast and waited for Frank to come back. It's time to say it out loud, and also to say a proper goodbye, to end this 8-year relationship. But just as Frank sat down, I was about to speak when the phone rang. "Brother Frank. My stomach hurts so much. Can you take me to the hospital?" Frank instantly panicked, grabbed his coat, and ran outside. "Heather accidentally fell on her stomach, it's a matter of life and death, I have to go check on her." I was taken aback and let out a self-deprecating laugh. Then, I finished the meal alone and had all of Frank's things packed up and sent to the company. Frank didn't come home all night. Heather posted a photo on Facebook late at night, showing Frank dozing off by the hospital bed. "Thanks to my good husband, the first word the baby will definitely say is Dad." I quickly exited, deleted, and blocked. The next day, I quickly completed the transaction with the buyer, changed the locks, and completely left the city. 3 days later, Frank accompanied Heather as she was discharged from the hospital. On the way, he saw someone selling flowers, and without thinking, he stopped and bought a large bouquet of bright red roses. Heather smiled as she took it. "How did you know I like roses?" Frank stepped back. "It's not for you." The smile on Heather's face froze. Frank seemed to remember something and chuckled lightly. "It's for Cece, she hasn't cried or made a fuss these days, which makes me quite happy, so consider it a little reward for her." But when he got home with the flowers, he couldn't open the door no matter what. Frank frowned. "Cece, Tammy?" Soon, the door opened. Frank chuckled lightly, but the next second, his smile froze. A stranger peeked out, sizing him up. "Who are you?" Frank's face turned pale. "Who else do you think I'm asking about? This is my home, where's Tammy?" As he spoke, he tried to barge in, only to be stopped by someone. "What do you mean barging into someone else's home? This is my newly purchased house. Are you looking for the previous owner? She has already sold the house, didn't you know?" Frank was stunned. He looked up at the home he had lived in for 8 years, now completely redecorated. He felt utterly lost. "No, how is this possible?" Just 3 or 4 days ago, I was still living here. This is my home with my wife, we've lived here for 8 years. The person sneered, brother, you wouldn't happen to be a homewrecker, would you? The previous owner of this place was a girl, and she has already decided to leave, which is why she sold the house. I advise you to find your wife first. After saying that, they pushed him out the door and slammed it shut. Frank was confused and refused to accept it. Tammy, what kind of game are you playing? He took out his phone, quickly dialed my number, but it kept saying the other party was turned off. He opened the social media app and tried to send me a message, but as soon as he sent it, a red exclamation mark appeared. Frank turned pale. You blocked me. Tammy, what on earth are you doing? It was then that he realized something was wrong. Frank anxiously paced back and forth, suddenly remembering something. He dialed the phone number of my former workplace. Hello? I'm Tammy's boyfriend, she blocked me, I need to talk to her, please have her pick up the phone. His colleague was silent for a while, then a voice came through inexplicably. Tammy quit last week, didn't you know? The bouquet in Frank's hand fell to the ground with a thud. The previously unbelievable fact slowly edged closer to the cruel truth. Tammy, really left? Frank tightened his grip on the phone, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. No, it can't be. We were getting married in less than half a month, how could she not tell me and just quit? We've been in this city for 10 years, where could she go if she leaves here? Frank kept asking, almost as if he were talking to himself. The colleague coldly laughed, still talking about a boyfriend? He doesn't care about she at all. If I had a boyfriend like you, I would have kicked him out long ago, let alone endure it for 8 years. Still talking about marriage? She is always feeling down because of your nonsense. How can you still have the face to say that? I'm going to block your number right now. I advise you not to call again, or every time I see you, I'll hit you. The colleague quickly hung up the phone, and no matter how many times Frank called back, he couldn't get through. When the colleague messaged me about this, I had just gotten off the plane and arrived in Delhi. Seeing the message, I smiled knowingly, blocking him is good, no need to pay him any mind. Then I turned off my phone and began my new life in Delhi. Soon I settled down in Delhi, rented a nice house, tended to flowers and grew vegetables, living a leisurely life. I no longer miss the days spent with Frank in the city. I no longer care about romantic love. The savings from these 10 years are enough for me to live comfortably in this city. Without my obstacles, Frank no longer has to sneak around, he can openly be with his childhood friend Heather. How wonderful. I never expected that, half a month later, Frank would actually find me. When he appeared in the town of Delhi, he looked very haggard. I was just about to deliver the vegetables I had just planted to my elderly neighbor, and I intended to pretend I hadn't seen him. But unexpectedly, he suddenly rushed over. He grabbed my wrist and his eyes were bloodshot. Tammy, what does it mean when you leave without a word? You didn't tell me, just sold the house, and cancelled the wedding. Why did you do this? I broke free from his restraints and said lightly, the house was bought by me, selling it is also my freedom. Besides, you, the esteemed general manager Frank, surely can afford a house, right? I heard from his little assistant. When I sent all his personal belongings to the company, they piled up like a small mountain. The office was abuzz with gossip, saying that general manager Frank had been kicked out by his wife. Frank's expression was worse than anyone else's. At that moment, Frank's face was pale to the point of being frightening, and he kept staring at me. We're about to get married, and you suddenly say you're leaving. What does it mean that the wedding is cancelled? I sighed lightly, Frank, we broke up. After Heather appeared, especially after she contacted Frank late at night multiple times due to her pregnancy, I had brought up breaking up more than once. Unfortunately, at that time, Frank was too arrogant, convinced that I couldn't live without him. He just brushed it off as a joke. I remember that time half a month ago when my stomach illness flared up, and I begged Frank to take me to the hospital. But Frank ignored me. He was annoyed that I interrupted his conversation with Heather, coldly saying, "You're noisy, and kicked me out of the car. It was hard to get a taxi late at night, and I endured the pain for a long time before the ambulance finally took me to the hospital. Later, when I was hospitalized, I called Frank, hoping he could bring me a charger. He rejected my calls in an instant, over a dozen times. Turning around, I saw him carefully supporting Heather in the hospital corridor. "Be careful, little aunt, don't drop the baby." Perhaps it was at that moment that I completely lost hope. I brought up the breakup for the last time. After that, I traveled alone to Yulong Snow Mountain for 7 days, while Frank turned a blind eye and deliberately ignored the breakup message. He bluntly asked me where I had gone. Looking back now, it all seems truly absurd and laughable. Frank insisted that we had not broken up. He even officially announced me on Facebook for the first time. "In half a month, my girlfriend and I will be getting our marriage certificate. We welcome all friends and family to attend our wedding." I felt a mix of emotions. After 8 years of dating, I had asked him more than once to post a photo of me on Facebook, at least to let the people around him know that he had a girlfriend like me. Frank always insisted on not posting it. So later on, whenever I brought it up, he would become impatient. "Tammy, are you being childish? The fact that you are my girlfriend is something that those who know us are aware of, and there's no need to show off to those who don't. When we get married, won't it be clear when we make an official announcement?" After he scolded me harshly, I never brought up the Facebook issue again. Even more so because I accidentally overheard his conversation with Heather. "She doesn't deserve to appear on my Facebook. If it weren't for you going abroad, how could I have agreed to date her? Now she has helped me too much. If I break up with her, I will be scolded for being ungrateful. Heather, if you are willing to come back, I might not even marry her." I didn't take in the rest of what he said. I returned home in a daze. I couldn't understand how the lover I had shared a bed with for so many years, who had just a few days ago gently massaged my feet with such care, could suddenly say such cold words. However, seeing a person's true colors is ultimately a good thing. After that, I no longer had any expectations of Frank. So when I sold the house and withdrew, I felt little sadness and was able to quickly move on to a new life. Nowadays, when I see the posts Frank makes on Facebook, I don't comment, I just open the Facebook post page and officially announce my photo with my new boyfriend. Don't believe rumors or spread them. I have broken up with my ex, please meet my boyfriend, Norman. After posting this on Facebook, the news exploded. Many people expressed their congratulations and sent their blessings. There were also more people who were surprised. "Tammy, you and Frank were together for 8 years. We all thought you would grow old together. How could you just break up like that?" I chuckled softly and replied, "It's nothing, the karmic bond has ended, and the destined one will come." On the day Norman and I were ice skating, suddenly a stranger sent a request to add me as a friend. I thought it was a customer from the flower shop, so I accepted. The other party immediately sent a chat screenshot. It was the conversation I had with a friend that day, where I mentioned that Frank and I were a karmic bond. A voice message quickly came through. "Tammy, how are you? Wasn't it you who said you would love me for a lifetime? How is it that now, with a new love, we have become a karmic bond?" Frank was filled with rage, seemingly wanting to vent it on me. But I couldn't be bothered to entertain him. "Sorry, my boyfriend is calling me, I can't chat." With that, I hung up. The promise of loving each other for a lifetime was based on the premise that the other person loved me too. Frank may have forgotten that there was another sentence that followed this one. "Frank, if one day you no longer love me, or if you fall in love with someone else, you must tell me, so we can part on good terms. Make sure you don't play both sides, and don't waste your efforts trying to deceive me. Otherwise, if I find out, I will make you regret it." Norman was someone I met while working at the flower shop. He was gentle, witty, and respectful towards women. I can't even begin to compare him to Frank. At that time, although there was a part of me that was trying to distract myself, I rarely thought of Frank afterward. I realized that hanging oneself on a tree means missing out on the beautiful forest outside. In fact, it means missing out on the tree that suits you best. Are you tired? Have some water. Norman handed me a bottle of mineral water and, worried that I might fall, carefully supported me. We were joking and laughing when suddenly a figure stormed over, swinging at Norman with great force. I looked up in shock and met Frank's furious expression. He pulled me into his arms, glaring at Norman with a mocking tone. Why choose to be a male mistress of all things? Don't you know that Tammy is my fiancé? We're about to get our marriage certificate soon. Norman is an amateur fitness coach, and with his flashy moves and brute strength, he is no match for Norman at all. Before Norman could say anything, I turned around and shielded him behind me, unable to hold back my retort. Norman is my boyfriend, you brought a woman and a child, so don't come here trying to make a scene, okay? Just an ungrateful ex, who was flirting with others while we were together, and still has the nerve to call someone else a mistress? After saying that, I took Norman's hand, our fingers intertwined. Frank's face turned pale, staring at me fiercely. Tammy, you. Just then, a woman with a pregnant belly slowly walked towards us from behind him. Heather feigned a pitiful tone and spoke sweetly. Sister Tammy, Frank only came to take care of me, a lonely little pregnant woman, a few times, and you got jealous and angry? I've already said there's nothing between us. Since you care so much, why won't you talk to me? As long as you say it, I will definitely keep my distance. But you, without a word, ran to Dolly, even cancelled the wedding, and even hooked up with another man. Isn't that slapping Frank in the face? I looked at the tour group behind her and couldn't help but scoff. With such a big belly, why do you still insist on running around? Be careful, or you might lose that poor child. Nowadays, seeing them again only makes me feel utterly disgusted. I don't want to be involved with them anymore. Pulling Norman to turn and leave, my wrist was suddenly grabbed again by Frank. Tammy. There was a hint of pleading in his eyes. I know you've been angry with me all along. Is it because I've been too close to Heather? I told you, the child in her belly is not mine. Once she successfully gives birth, I will send her abroad, and by then, no one will disturb you. Tammy, come back with me. I could no longer tolerate it and forcefully pulled my hand away. Mr. Frank, your relationship with others has nothing to do with me. Please do not get carried away and disturb my life with my boyfriend anymore. He didn't know that on the very first day he brought Heather and the tour group to Dolly, Heather had come to find me. She smiled brightly and confidently told me, Sister Tammy, thank you for making way for me and returning the child's father to me. She said that the child in her belly was not her boyfriend's at all. It was conceived during a drunken night with Frank. But Frank didn't know. She wanted to give him a surprise. It turned out that back then, Frank was wholeheartedly pursuing Heather. However, Heather was materialistic and had left him because of his poverty. Now that she saw he was wealthy, she was eager to get close to him again, saying she wanted to be Mrs. U. I couldn't help but sneer, Heather, have some dignity, don't make yourself so cheap and tarnish the reputation of women. That incident really disgusted me. Ever since I came to Dolly, I have been increasingly grateful that I decisively left back then. I wouldn't want to be involved with such a mess. After living in Dolly for half a year, I have become more accustomed to this pace of life. Norman is by my side. When we work, we manage the shop, and when we don't feel like working, we can go hiking and exploring at any time. Norman took me to Yulong Snow Mountain twice. At the top of Yulong Snow Mountain, he gently held me in his arms and said, Cece, will you let me take care of you for a lifetime? I smiled and nodded. I always think back to what my mother told me when she was still alive. She had consulted a fortune teller who said that my destined partner would be found at Yulong Snow Mountain. But my home is very, very far from Yulong Snow Mountain. I need to grow up and be able to earn money before I can reach Yulong Snow Mountain. I was still thinking about taking my mom to Yulong Snow Mountain in the future, so she could see my true love with her own eyes. Unfortunately, my mom passed away early. Her dying wish was for me to visit Yulong Snow Mountain. So for these years, I was convinced that Frank was my true love and wanted to go to Yulong Snow Mountain with him. But unexpectedly, fate turned out to be predetermined from the start. We dated for 8 years, but Frank was always unable to make time. I gave up on him. Turning around at the foot of Yulong Snow Mountain, I met my true love. Norman knelt on one knee at the top of the mountain, pulling out a delicate diamond ring from his pocket, smiling as beautifully as the sunshine. "Cece, marry me." I nodded, wrapped my arms around his waist, and kissed his lips. On the day we got our marriage certificate, Frank, having heard the news from somewhere, came to stop me again. Over the past 6 months, Frank had come to Dolly more than a dozen times, just to force me to go back with him. He even took out the property deed, handing it to me with a sincere expression. "Cece, this is the best riverside villa, and it's only in your name, legally certified. Come back with me, shall we get married? In the 6 months you were gone, I realized how important you are to me. I can't lose you. But I'm sorry. I've been doing very well without you for the past 6 months." I smiled and reached out to take it, and Frank thought I had agreed, his eyes lighting up. However, I slowly opened my mouth. "That's right, this villa should be your compensation to me. After all these years with you, I haven't gained anything and have lost a lot. Consider it your compensation for our breakup." After all, he started his company, and I didn't take a single share. This villa is worth tens of millions. It is also what I deserve. On the day Norman and I got our marriage certificate, I officially announced it on Facebook, and friends and family sent their blessings. Frank had clearly been blocked and deleted by me, but I don't know where he saw it. He came to Dolly to find me again. In just a month, I don't know what he went through, but he seemed to have aged 10 years. He stood in the cold wind, unable to stop coughing. When he saw me, he still stepped forward excitedly. "Tammy, don't go yet. I just want to ask you one question. If it weren't for Heather, would you still leave me? Or would you marry me, and none of this would have happened?" I pondered, maybe yes, maybe no. But life has no ifs. Regardless, Heather appeared, and she is important to you. Maybe I should thank Heather. If it weren't for her existence, I wouldn't be able to see your true self. After saying this, I took Norman and left together. Frank stood in place for a long, long time. Until he became a tiny black dot in the distance, completely disappearing. It was 3 months later when I heard news of Frank again. I heard that by the last time we met, Frank had already been diagnosed with lung cancer. He had been smoking for a long time, which had already left his lungs a large patch of black. He knew his time was short, and the last time was also to see me for the last time. She was determined to become Mrs. U, and in order not to be scolded as a mistress, she went around flaunting that she was carrying Frank's child. The result was discovered by her boyfriend who had come from abroad, and in a fit of rage, he beat her up, causing her to miscarry. It turned out that the child was not Frank's. The reason Heather said that to me was merely to make me give up and completely leave Frank. As a result, Frank saw Heather's true colors and reclaimed the villa under his name, along with all the privileges. In order to take revenge, Heather actually replaced Frank's medication with sleeping pills. When Frank's cancer relapsed, he did not receive timely treatment and died that night. Heather was arrested and imprisoned for harming him by switching the medication. Now that I know all of this, I can only feel it is absurd and lamentable. But it no longer concerns me. Norman and I held a grand wedding in Dolly, with friends and family present to congratulate us and wish us a lifetime of happiness together. After the wedding concluded, I took Norman to my mother's grave. "Mom, I listened to your words, and I found my true love at Yulong Snow Mountain. He is my husband, Norman." As soon as I finished speaking, a cool breeze swept by, and the dogtail grass on the grave swayed joyfully. I smiled. "Mom, did you hear that? You like Norman too, don't you?" That gentle breeze lingered on. It turned out that a long, long time ago, my mother had already told me who my true love was. I held Norman's hand tightly. "Don't worry, Mom, we will definitely be very happy from now on."